Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. We are live this morning with Rosetta Lee. She's with the Seattle Girls School. She's going to talk to us about optimism and hope,
Mhm.
specifically optimism and hope for our teens so that they can be optimistic and hopeful about the future. She's going to tell us a little bit more about that and why it's important. Before we get to the conversation, though, I want to remind you that we are live on Tuesday morning at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. If you have any questions or comments for our guests, please put them in the comment section. I will be looking for those and she will speak with you directly. If you are watching us on a playback, thank you for doing that. And you can also place questions or comments in the comment section. Just know that neither one of us will be there to answer them, but another person who's watching may dialogue with you. That happens often. So still feel free to participate. Thank you. Hi, Rosetta. Thanks for joining me.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. Let's start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Sure. And so my name is Rosetta Lee, and I'm an outreach specialist at Seattle Girls School, which is a middle school for girls and gender diverse students in Seattle, Washington. And I am a classroom teacher there. And the rest of the time, I actually work throughout the country, working with K through 12 schools, colleges and universities, nonprofits, government agencies, basically anybody who wants to do work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And frankly, teenagers are at the heart of my teaching, and I think it's a really important and joyful time, actually. And so they keep me like engaged and hopeful and optimistic themselves. And so I guess I bring multiple hats as somebody who loves middle schoolers and teenagers, and somebody who is really thinking about how to make the world a little bit better for all of us.
Mhm.
So.
We were just talking in our pregame
Mhm.
about the fact that teenagers are hyper aware of the world
Mhm.
around them.
Mhm.
And sometimes that can be a very scary place. There's
Mhm.
COVID and mass shootings and overscheduling or
Mhm.
socio-political tensions nationally and globally. And I could go on, body image and
Mhm.
all the other stuff they're dealing with.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, why are hope and optimism important for them? But
Mhm.
before we get to that, can we just define hope and optimism for the
Mhm.
sake of the conversation?
Sure thing. And so for me, hope and optimism are sort of like related, right? Hope is
Mhm.
that I can look forward to something that can be wonderful.
Mhm.
It's not a misguided sort of naivete or ignorant kind of thing, right? Someday
Mhm.
I'm gonna, Prince Charming will come along and I'll live happily ever after. I think that's not really hope, but it's that idea of I hope for caring relationships in my life. I hope that I get to pursue my passions. I hope that I can build a community around me. I hope I can like find accomplishment and satisfaction in the efforts that I put in. So it's that idea of I put into life and I can expect or at least know that I'm working towards something that will have return. I think hopelessness is when it feels futile. It feels like nothing you do matters and there are no
Mhm.
outcomes that you have control over. And I think
Mhm.
especially for teenagers, hope is really tied to autonomy and agency, right? Because
Mhm.
developmentally they really want control over their lives, and they do want things like control, decision making power, a sense of like what they do matters. And I think
Mhm.
there are so many big things happening. It's very easy for them to feel hopeless, right? And
Mhm.
it's that idea of optimism. And again, optimism is not so much like an ego, right?
Mhm.
Or like a diluted sense of self. It's actually about like I know what my strengths are, I know what my flaws are, and there are flaws that I'm working on and I know I can get better, and there are flaws that I think I'm just gonna like learn to live with, right? And again, it's that idea. I go into situations like believing more often than not, people are basically good. Believing more often
Mhm.
than not, the outcomes will be good. And I think it's that idea of it. I don't expect perfection, but I do have this like positive outlook and hopefulness.
And why is it important for teens to have this positive outlook?
I mean, I think it's true for everybody, right?
Mhm.
Ultimately, I think especially as young people who are entering
Mhm.
or thinking about entering adulthood, for some of our high schoolers, they're thinking about their next chapter in their lives. Um,
Mhm.
Ultimately, I think that sense of hopefulness and optimism allows them to do things like take healthy risks or
Mhm.
dream big, or connect across differences. And I think especially in this world where we've been physically separated from one another because of COVID,
Mhm.
right? We've been ideologically separated from one another because of the hyper polarization that has been happening. And here's the other piece is that teenagers are actually deeply wired for connection, right? This is a time when adult influences are less important and peer influences are actually more important. And
Mhm.
this idea of building community among like-aged peers and feeling socially like tied to a web is critically important to them. So I think that idea of I am connected to something bigger and I'm connected to people around me is going to be really critical, especially for teenagers.
At the top of the show, I listed some of the things that
Mhm,
teenagers are concerned about.
mhm,
How do we help them
mhm,
be hopeful and optimistic in light of all these things, which are real and true things?
absolutely. And it's that idea of, I think there's this impression that if something big is happening, I have to put
Mhm.
all of my attention on that. And if I like stray it to anything else, it's actually my like failing my values, right? So like if
Mhm.
like injustice is happening in the world, but I'm like longing to hang out with my friends, like those like longings are selfish and I should
Mhm.
like worry about something that's bigger. Like even yesterday, I was working with high schoolers, and they're like, we were talking about like microaggressions, like the daily hurts that happen when misunderstanding or misinterpretation or assumptions happen around identity. And they're like, one of the students said, I mean, there's so much like big things happening around injustice. Like, is it really any right of mine to say, like, when you said this, it hurt my feelings? It feels too small. And I'm like, here's the thing. Um, yes, there are big things in the world, and I never want you to be the ostrich that like puts your head in your sand and disconnects from it. At the
Mhm.
same time, it's actually in the micro, in the here and now, and in the person to person connections where we're reminded about what we're actually working toward, right? And so, like the fact that you're actually able to find moments of laughter, like that's a reminder that joy can happen, right? When we can spend some meaningful time with people that we care about, it's this like reminder about the importance of connections. And so
Mhm.
yes, big world things are important, but don't apologize for reminding yourself what we're actually like working towards, and in the micro practice what we hope for in the macro, right?
I love that. Remind yourself that joy can happen and in
Mhm,
the moment. I have a comment here.
mhm,
Biana says, because teens need to have hope and dreams, so to continue to pursue, as adults, we become so beaten down by life, we don't dare to dream or hope. We become stagnant and unhappy.
mm. And for you parents, like this is something to remember, right? Because again, I think those of us who like have been around for a while, there is this like reality check that often
Mhm.
comes in, and there is a tendency to want to protect our young people from
Mhm.
maybe making the same mistakes that we did, or maybe we had like big dreams but we weren't able to pursue them the same way, and we want to like sort of like prepare them for maybe a reality, right?
Mhm.
And I get that instinct. And I think the reality is, I think teenagers are really aching to live those experiences for themselves, right? Like, this
Mhm.
is the nature of their hardwiring. Evolutionarily speaking, like, adolescence is a time when you're supposed to take risks, connect to peers, because evolutionarily speaking, you're supposed to move away from the
Mhm.
cocoon and the protection of your family and actually seek out a new mate and maybe seek out a new community to diversify your genetic pool, or like check out new environments. It's actually the adolescence of a species that actually do things like find new like food sources or like new environments to thrive in and things like that. So there's like hardwired for that. So
Mhm.
for us to constantly check it as actually like developmentally stunting them, right?
Mhm.
And it's that idea of like how do we I think about like this idea of being a consultant to teenagers, right? It's this idea of I'm here for you, I have some lived experience, I have some perspectives, and anytime you want to tap into it, I'm here for you, right?
Mhm.
There are going to be times when I'm going to speak up because I care for you too much and I'm worried too much, but ultimately know that this is your life and this is your choice. And I think that kind of partnership is really meaningful for young people, and they will actually seek your advice. I think us forcing it on them actually
Mhm.
causes that very rejection that makes them stumble into things that maybe they could have avoided.
I agree with what you're saying. I know for those of us who are primary caretakers of teens, it's really hard. I'm one, it's very, very hard. But on the rare occasion that I succeed in stepping back,
Hmm.
what happens is exactly what you said. They come to me.
Hmm.
And not just in the critical moments when you hope that they will come to you and you set laying the foundation from birth on up,
Hmm.
that they'll come to you during those, but even in the micro moments, if
Hmm.
you can step back, and stepping back is really hard. And I won't, I
Hmm.
say, be gentle with yourself, that you won't
Hmm.
just step back and then be there permanently. It's going to be back and forth and back and forth.
Absolutely. You know, Lisa Damore, who wrote the book Untangled,
Hmm.
talks about this beautiful analogy that teenagers and parents have, right? Which is like ultimately teenagers really want to swim in the deep end of the pool, right? They
Hmm.
want to be like independent and powerful and take that risk. It's a little scary, but it's also that sense of accomplishments and the unknown and the excitement. And you are the
Hmm.
side of the pool, right? And so part of the way they go to the deep end of the pool is they push off of you, right? And
Hmm.
sometimes it's
Hmm.
hurtful, right? But
Yeah.
sometimes the world is really rough and it is exhausting to tread water in the deep end all the time. So they will periodically come back to you, hang on to
Hmm.
the side, enjoy those moments, revel in those moments when they want to curl up and watch the show that they watched when they were little, right? But also
Yeah.
know that pretty soon afterwards they're going to push off again because that's their job. And you are this like wonderful, like safety that's always there and they can always see you. And so know that they have that safety, which actually allows them to thrive more in those unknowns.
Back to hope and optimism. Can they be taught? Can, if they, and if so, how do we teach it to
Yeah.
teens?
Yeah, and here's the thing. I mean, I think oftentimes what happens is, especially in this current time, young people are engaging a lot more with social media, right? And just media in general. And I think some critical awareness and choice making around media is going to be really important. I know, like as soon as I say like media, the idea of like limiting screen time or taking
Yeah.
away devices, like it just makes everyone cringe. I'm actually talking about this idea of um, making sure that they're like self-aware of the fact that their choices matter, right? And I
Mhm.
often like to tell teens like social media actually doesn't care what you believe in. Like it doesn't care what your values are, what you're passionate about. It actually doesn't care. What it cares about is screen time that you spend on that platform, right?
Yeah.
So when you click on something, they're going to say, okay, you're into this. I'm going to feed you more and more of this so that you're likely to stick around. And not only that, we know from research, marketing research, that fear sells a lot more than hope or joy or optimism, right? Um, that they're going to show you like more and more scary, like headlines, things that like make you want to go, oh my gosh, if I don't look at this, like I'm going to die, kind of like
Yeah.
level of fear mongering. And of course, they're often like simplified, polarizing, etc. So like
Mhm.
ultimately, I want you to think about the fact that you're actually through your and because of the nature of the finance of social media, like you're actually controlling like revenue streams through your clicks and views and how much time you spend, right? So you get to decide whether you want to feed into an economic process that's actually using um,
Mhm.
like polarization and like negativity spiraling, or you can say I want to be informed so I'm going to engage enough to sort of not only like understand and connect people that agree with me, but also maybe to like observe from afar people who don't agree with and get a sense of where they're coming from, because then you're more likely to be fed a balanced viewpoint and you're less likely to spiral into a place where you're like the world is blowing up and there's nothing I can do. Like, and
Yes.
so there's that piece, right? And there's the other piece, which is, the groups that we belong to, the channels that we go to, uh, the friend circles we have on digital media. Those aren't the folks that, like, in the end, when you're sick, come over with a bowl of soup, right?
Yes,
So I
yes.
think we need to, like, have them practice, like, get really hyper local, right? It's like, what are the things that we can do in our immediate families to spend time and be good to one another? What are like, if you're a part of a faith community, if you're a part of a volunteer organization, something that is like serving a greater good or a higher purpose, right? That they can try to, like, be reminded, right? That this person next to me, we're not going to agree on everything, but gosh, to watch you, like, package, like, food for the elderly with me, like, I feel that sense of connection and shared value. And I think
Mhm.
so much of, like, the bigger media picture says, everybody has, if you they don't align exactly with every single one of your values, they are not worth
Mhm.
you're seeing them as even human. And I think that's a really dangerous trend that we're seeing. And I
Yeah.
think when you're able to get down to the micro, look at somebody in the eye, listen to their story, I think it's actually impossible to dismiss fellow human beings, right?
Yeah.
And just this idea of, I think ultimately teenagers can get pretty myopic and self-centered, right? That's part of their developmental process, right? Um, but, like, helping them connect to something bigger than themselves, or something that is more important than themselves, and that they have, like, some agency and control over that. It's a great opportunity to get them out of their own heads, and also, like, expressing things like gratitude or receiving gratitude from those they are, serving. I think those little things and interactions actually boost our sense of joy a lot. Like, for me personally, I very much am trying to make sure that I am spending some balanced time in community with people,
Mhm.
um, and also trying to keep informed. But I don't, like, there. I'll actually limit myself how long I will allow myself to go down, like, rabbit holes of things like social media, because I think you can, like, really consume us.
Yeah. It consumes me multiple times a week. So now we're talking about kids
Mhm,
and their perspective of the future, which
mhm,
is difficult during the best of times
mhm,
because they're short-sighted and they're not
mhm,
thinking long term.
mhm,
Um, but now we add in all
mhm,
these other things, and if they are surrounding themselves, be it online or in person, with pessimism and
mhm,
negativity,
mhm,
how do we get you've spoken about how we can find joy and hope.
mhm,
How do we get them to see that and project it into the future? I have a lot of parents coming to me with high school juniors and seniors
mhm,
who were flourishing and now just don't care.
mhm,
Literally, there are high school seniors who just won't even fill out those college applications, and they were college bound. It's not as if
mhm,
they had
mhm,
another path that they were going to take.
mhm,
And some who were going to take another path, and they're stymied too. So, how do we use hope and
mhm.
optimism to get them to think about their future?
Yeah, and and this is a scary thing to say, but I think it's that idea of, um like, the idea of choice and agency, right? Because the
Mhm,
reality is, I think they have been taught this version of the future, right? This
mhm,
version of the future was, you do well in high school, you do your extracurriculars, you apply to college, get into the college, hopefully
mhm,
within your first few choices, you, like,
mhm,
connect with peers and you live independently for the first time. You're, like, calling your own shots. You got to start doing things like managing money. You start thinking
mhm,
about what careers or, like, vocations or passions could I pursue through my higher education learning, so that you can, like, get a good job and, like, make a decent living, and someday, like, meet somebody and, like, start a family. Even, like, that
mhm.
was the path that was laid out,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
I
yeah.
think the current times have really blown that up. So I
Yes.
think part of our reality is we need to recognize that reality, and empathize with young people about that reality, right? And
Mhm,
it's that idea of, so given this, like, it's not right, it's not fair, but it's real, So
Mhm.
we can either sit back and go, I don't care. I don't care. I'm just going to disconnect. Who cares? Like nothing I do matters. Or we can say, in the
Mhm.
context of what is happening, right? I
Mhm.
think there are people who are like, the kind of college experience I was wanting, they're not quite ready for that, like to happen yet. Like colleges
Mhm.
are still figuring out how to do college and do the college
Mhm.
experience in the context of COVID, right? So is it actually a terrible choice to actually try to figure out how to do things like gap years, right? So that
Mhm.
I can actually wait for the system to catch up to the experience that I want. Is it that there's this recognition of what I had imagined is not going to happen, but how do I ask, right? Those next
Mhm.
chapters, how do you respond to this time, and how do you try to create opportunities for that college experience that I was kind of looking
Mhm.
forward to and hoping for, and see what the answer is. Because again, the narrative is everything stinks and there's nothing you can do. But I think
Yeah.
when you dig deeper, I think there are many like educators and institutions that are trying really hard to make the best out of the situation, right? And
Mhm.
so, and I think part of it is also recognizing, and I think, we have this tendency as human beings to like pay attention to the deficit ideology, right? Um,
Mhm.
so we are successful despite, right? And
Mhm.
I think as a kid growing up with lots of marginalized identities, right? I'm a
Mhm.
student of color. I'm a woman. I grew up working class poor. I'm first generation immigrant. Like, you know, all those things. People often talked about how I have all these like roadblocks up against me and
Mhm.
opportunities are slim. And even when I started to succeed, people were like, "Oh my gosh, you thrived despite your circumstances." And I think
Yeah.
we actually need to start thinking about because of what we have gone through, what is the
Mhm.
unique gift that we offer the world, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so I think about like Kelly McGonigal's book, The Upside of Stress. I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of mythology that somehow stress is automatically bad, but there are actually some forms of stress that actually makes us perform better, or like exercise more grit, or actually see that struggle as a really important growth chapter. And so I
Mhm.
think it's about helping young people think about like you are experiencing a circumstance that no other generation has had to go through,
Yes.
and there are going to be perspectives and experiences and knowledge and way of being that you can contribute to the world that no other generation can, right?
Mhm.
And so, how do we identify some of those things and tap into those things and practice some of those things? Because
Mhm.
again, whatever that next chapter is, whenever it comes in, whatever it is, like think about what can you contribute to the world simply because of the
Mhm.
experience that you've had as who
Mhm.
you are in the context of your life.
I love the word experience because I sometimes talk to teens and they're privileged,
Hmm.
specifically socioeconomically, but
Hmm.
sometimes racially,
Hmm.
and they think I haven't struggled. Well, your
Hmm.
entire generation has struggled together.
Yes. Yes.
um,
Hmm.
so, redefining struggle as different types of experiences, that there's not
Hmm.
one way to
Hmm.
struggle and achieve, and if you haven't
Hmm.
had that type of struggle, then you either are
Hmm.
not worthy or don't understand life.
Hmm.
We're almost at the end of our time, but you
Hmm.
talked about changing, being intentional about your surroundings, whether
Hmm.
it's online or in person. Does that mean
Hmm.
that hope and optimism are contagious?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I guess for me, I think about the communities that I've built, and we may not be able to physically get together, but like when we get
Mhm.
together, even virtually, just this idea of like we know that part of our like getting together will be doing things like telling slightly inappropriate jokes and belly
Mhm.
laughing the entire time, right? It will
Yeah.
be about like showing off pictures of the little ones in our lives and the little like markers, joyful markers and darling things that they do. And for me, it just uplifts me for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And I do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. I could really get bummed out if I chose to.
Yeah.
But it's that idea of, yeah, there are people in my life who actually are very doom and gloom. I just opt not to spend so much time with them, right?
Yeah.
Like I think we surround ourselves, like how we show up gives permission for others to show up the same way. And I think how others show up can sometimes influence
Mhm.
what we think. Like we're just hardwired for mirroring, right?
Mhm.
So like the mirror neurons say, if a fellow human being is showing up this way, you start mirroring like behaviors, attitudes, like speech patterns, even because that's the way
Mhm.
we build relationships. Like if we opt to stay, like hang out with the negative
Mhm.
Nellies a lot, then that's what we're going to start modeling and mirroring. So I hope that you, even if it feels awkward, like express that like level of like joy and connection, and
Mhm.
surround yourself with folks who are willing to like mirror that for you.
Thank you. So, what I learned today is that hope and optimism do not mean the absence of negativity.
Mm-mm.
Um, and I think that that's a misconception that other people may feel now, and that we must teach our teens
Mm-hmm.
that there's going to be negativity. There are going to be things that
Mm-hmm.
bum you out
Mm-hmm.
or impede your progress, but you
Mm-hmm.
can still be hopeful and optimistic
Mm-hmm.
about the current time and your future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And who knows what the world will hold, right? I think there
Yeah.
have been a lot of discoveries that have happened
Mhm.
in this time, that the world will be looking for like idealistic, optimistic, brilliant young people to help
Mhm.
problem solve, because there are many
Mhm.
things that we have
Mhm.
said we never want this to happen again. And that's not
Yes.
gonna, like, we're gonna repeat that history without some like newer thinking and
Mhm.
creativity and optimism. And I
Mhm.
think young people are just the kind of folks who could do it. So,
Yeah. And problem solving is great because when young people say to me that, what am I going to be? I don't know
mhm,
what I want for a career. And I tell them, I think that it may not have been invented yet, but
mhm,
I see that you're a thinker, or I see that you're a problem solver, or I see
mhm,
that you like to do things
mhm,
with your hand. What you end up doing may not exist right now.
mhm,
And
mhm,
it may change over
mhm,
time. I don't know, but
mhm.
and that kind of, I see it relaxes them. They can
Oh
think
yeah,
about their future in a different way,
yeah.
that they don't have to think doctor, lawyer,
Oh,
bookkeeper.
absolutely. Well, I always like to joke with kids that, I was a pre-med about to be a neurosurgeon, go like straight, like aiming
Yeah.
really hard toward neurosurgery, and then became a theater stage manager and became a middle school teacher and became a national diversity expert. I couldn't have charted that when I was
Yes.
your
Yeah.
age. Like,
Yes.
but for me, I think the thing that happened was I looked at those like needs and tried to fill them. I looked at
Mhm.
those opportunities and those risks, and I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna be brave and go for it. And I feel like
Mhm.
I am so blessed with the path that I have walked, and I'm really excited for what the next chapter is going to be. Who knows?
Mhm. Yeah.
So I think that's true for anybody. So it's that idea of like, keep hopeful, keep your vistas wide open, and know that
Mhm.
you bring really wonderful gifts to the world. That's kind of like, you're gonna find that fit for you out there. So
If you have one thing that a parent or caregiver of a teen remembers from this conversation, one takeaway, what should it be?
I think the one takeaway is the idea of, as a family, think about what are the ways that you are creating rituals of joy, right? Because
Okay.
in a time where we can get like overwhelmed and overscheduled, and like negativity is like a washing over us, what are the ways that we can create rituals of joy and gratitude? I think that can really set a trajectory that can be self-sustaining, because it is a good
Mhm.
feeling. So,
Thank you. I love that. Rituals of joy and gratitude. I love that. And
mhm,
it's going to be different for each family because each
mhm,
family is unique.
absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I want to remind our audience that tomorrow, same time, Wednesday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, on Your Team for Parents Facebook Live, YouTube channel, or Twitter Live, you can catch Coffee with Jen and Sharon. They are moms. They're always talking about a specific parenting issue of the day. It's a lot of fun. So bring your coffee, tea, whatever it is that you'd like. Join them 10:30 tomorrow, and they will dish the scoop on something having to do with parenting teens. Rosetta, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, everybody.